Hello, and welcome to the Joy of Cooking podcast. Each week we set the table for a discussion about recipes and stories from the authors of The Joy of Cooking, Kitchen Victories and Misadventures, and most importantly, what we are cooking and eating right now. We're glad you've joined us at the table today. I'm Shannon Larson, home cook, ardent Joy of Cooking user and fan, and kimchi enthusiast.
I'm Megan Scott, co-author of the 2019 Joy of Cooking. I'm a food editor by day and avoider of dish duty by night, and I make a mean sauerkraut soup.
I'm John Becker, fourth-generation co-author and steward of The Joy of Cooking, America's oldest family-run cookbook. Generally, I have over 10 applications running on my laptop at any given time, 2 browsers, perhaps a dozen windows. It's a problem. Please.
Your intros are getting a little bit weirder every week, and I love it.
He's right, though. I looked at his desktop the other day, and I was just like, my brain just stopped working immediately. I can't do it.
Same.
So that's what's going on. Okay.
Oh, this explains so much.
How was your week, Shannon?
It was really good. We did a lot of cooking this week, which was fun. Weather, it's gray and kind of rainy, so we didn't really leave the house much. We had a friend in town this weekend. It's just been a really nice time. Last night we had some friends over to just hang out with her, and we did homemade tomato soup and a flight of grilled cheeses. So we had 3 different grilled cheese types and cut them into little bits, and so everybody could have one had caramelized onions and topped the tomato soup with some crispy chanterelles that a coworker had given me. Yeah, it was honestly really fun and also pretty easy. So hot tip.
Love that.
Wow. Grilled cheese flight sounds like a good alternative to doing the 3 or 4 cheese grilled cheese or
each one had 1 cheese, spicy, sweet, and herby. So
you're respecting the cheese.
Exactly. That's what it's all about. What about you guys?
Well, we went to the coast this week. So for those who don't live in Oregon, it's not the beach, it's the coast. We don't do beaches here. We just have a coast. And it was really just to get a change of scenery. And we went on a really nice hike, saw some elk just grazing in the meadow. It was so beautiful. And we also got to go by our favorite smoked salmon place, Barnacle Bill's in Lincoln City. So we picked up a bunch of smoked salmon there, which was awesome.
Barnacle Bill's is great.
It's the best.
Really is. Family tradition at this point. Been enjoying their smoked salmon since I was a little kid.
Oh yeah, because your dad used to go or he would ship it to himself or something. What did he do?
I mean, he got other people to ship it to him because Barnacle Bills for the longest time they would not ship. Things have changed. They have some retort packaged product, and highly recommend if you're ever in the Lincoln City area. But we kind of focused on soup, I guess, when we were at the coast. It was a little bit rainy. We had 1 day of sunshine.
Yeah.
But first night was a
minestrone.
Yeah, minestrone.
Because you can kind of just make that with whatever veggies you have, and then you just need some pasta. So we did that. We were also just working within the confines of someone else's kitchen, which is always a little bit of a challenge. So what pots do we have? What utensils do we have? What things are missing from the pantry?
Yeah, there was a Dutch oven there that was pristine.
It was new, so new and shiny. Yeah, it was really.
I forgot what they looked like before. Yeah. I mean, it made me feel like we need to clean ours, a deep clean.
Yeah, I probably need to do the same thing.
But Caldo Verde, that was another good one.
Yeah.
Very simple.
Today, we would like to welcome our guest, Anna Brones. Anna is a writer, artist, and educator based in the Pacific Northwest. She works as a paper cut artist, hand-cutting illustrations from single pieces of paper, and is the author of several books. She produces Creative Fuel, a newsletter and podcast, and is the founder of Creative Fuel Collective. She was also one of the illustrators for the 2019 edition of Joy of Cooking. Anna, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Anna, what is bringing you joy right now in the kitchen? What are you doing?
Oh, well, I loved that you guys mentioned chanterelles because I live near where I grew up, near my parents' property, and it's a very forested property. And we usually get maybe 2 or 3 chanterelles in the fall. We have our favorite spots where we keep an eye out for. But they just have been so robust this year. I think we've had chanterelles for dinner maybe 5 or 6 times.
Oh, that's so
in
good.
the last few weeks. And we just had we just put some chanterelles on a pizza on Friday night. So I feel like just the color and just finding them and trying to be on chanterelle hunt in the forest and keeping your eyes peeled. It's just been my favorite thing for the last few weeks.
Yeah, they're so beautiful. We were when we were at the coast this week, we were trying to find some in the woods, but it was I think it's a little too wet and cold at this point. We found some lookalikes, but nothing, no actual chanterelles.
They've been crazy this year though. Like in general, I've just seen so many people picking so many.
They've gotten very waterlogged by this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I actually don't know why there have been so many. I keep meaning to ask. I have a good friend who actually runs a mushroom company and sells to local restaurants, and I keep meaning to ask him like what the ideal conditions were this year that made for that kind of an abundance. But I sort of also don't necessarily care what the reasons are. I'm just happy to be in that moment.
Exactly. Do you find the yellowfoots as well?
Yeah, it's funny because I was just texting with a friend the other night and he had just found some yellowfoots and I actually haven't seen any of those, but we did find one last week and now I can't remember what it was called, but it was kind of a lookalike, but it was actually a non-edible. So I think what's so interesting with chanterelles, because I always joke, it's like that and morels are like the two mushrooms that I can confidently identify. But I was like, it is so interesting to think about all these lookalikes because it's like you do still need to be careful and pay attention, right?
For sure.
So that's a good reminder.
Yeah. What's the saying if you can't? Well, no, the saying is there are old mushroom foragers and bold mushroom foragers, but no bold mushroom foragers. Yeah.
So, Anna, how were you introduced to the joy and how did you get involved in creating those beautiful illustrations for the joy?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this, just in thinking of having this conversation today. And so I did not grow up with the joy of cooking. My mom is from Sweden, so most of our cookbooks were Swedish cookbooks that she kind of had from her days. It's sort of like the Swedish iconic classics. And then we had the Betty Crocker cookbook, a bright orange 3-ring binder. Betty Crocker, I think was gifted to her by my grandmother, and we didn't really even use that. I just looked at it for like the funny 70s photos. But so I actually remember when Megan and John, I just got this email kind of out of the blue. It was like, "Hi, we're from the Joy of Cooking, and we know you do paper cut illustrations, and would you be interested in like having a chat about maybe making some for the book?" And I remember saying to my mom, and a good friend of my mom's is kind of like an extra auntie for me. I was like, "What do you guys know about the joy of cooking?" And they both kind of looked at me and they were like, "Are you serious?" Because I just didn't have any experience with it, which is just so hilarious knowing how iconic it is. But yeah, that just kind of like took me into the whole world. And I think my favorite thing, I think now having like had more of a relationship with it since making the paper cut illustrations, is that it allows me to ask other people when if they learn that I made the illustrations, then it sort of leads to a conversation. And actually, a family that we used to rent our house from, they had a long-standing edition in the kitchen, and the grandfather of that family, they would always write, his name was Don, and they would always write down like funny things that he said in the book. So like on the front pages, because they were just always in the kitchen, and that was the book that was on hand. So it was this book that was like a collection of Donisms. And so he passed away in like 2018 maybe, and then when the book came out, I gifted a copy of the new edition to that family as a Christmas present because it had my illustrations in it, and then it turned into the Judaisms because Judy, the grandmother's still around, so they still have that. They just like keep track of all the silly things and fun things that she says in the kitchen. So I just kind of love that tradition, and it actually made me start making notes in my own version that I have now. So
I love that so much.
Yeah, that's our favorite part of finding old editions too, is looking in the margins to see what people wrote or what people thought was important enough to like put in behind the cover. Yeah, it makes them really special.
I feel like recording, funny things that somebody has said, that's like a whole new level.
Yeah.
Usually it's annotating a recipe to say it needs this or that,
or this is good.
or like recipes from newspapers like stuck in the pages and whatnot.
That's what mine looks like right now.
I love it. Okay, we are going to move into our tasting segment. So each show has a topic. And this week our theme is fermentation, but more specifically sauerkraut, because later in the show we're going to answer a question about sauerkraut. And fermentation is such a huge category to talk about. But for the tasting segment, I have not actually made any sauerkraut this year, which I need to get on that. But in the meantime, we brought some other fermented things to taste. We brought some half sour pickles, which I think at this point are full sours.
Yeah, they're fully sour.
Because they're over a year old, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they still look really awesome.
Yeah.
And then we brought some very ripe kimchi also.
This is all related to the question.
We swear.
And it's an excuse for us to eat pickles every single
exactly.
episode, which is great.
Pickle time. Sorry you can't be here to taste these pickles, Anna.
No, it's just funny though, because somebody just sent me a graphic of like a Richard Scarry illustration with like different items of like self-care. And one of them was eat a pickle.
I love that so much. Oh, I love Richard Scarry. It's the best.
Oh my gosh.
John actually didn't grow up with Richard Scarry, so every time I'm like, I feel like I'm in a Richard Scarry book, he's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm in Busy Town.
I mean, you showed me some images.
Yeah, I showed you some illustrations.
I get the gist.
It's the best.
Didn't your Shannon? Didn't your former housemate / upstairs mate Holly? I remember she was like, the best part of being an adult is that I get to just eat a pickle.
Oh yeah,
whenever I want.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, literally yesterday I was driving home from Le Bouffe, which we've talked about on this podcast before, this little international market here in Portland, and they had a jar of pickled baby corn. And I was like, I need to have that right now. And like, I didn't even wait until we got home. I just popped open the jar and I was just like eating pickled baby corn. I'm like, this is, and it was like, I don't know, 2:00 in the afternoon. I'm like, this is great. This is perfect.
That's a good perk.
Anytime snack.
Yeah.
Yeah, so John, could you talk about these pickles a little bit since you made them?
Sure. So yeah, these started out as half sours. That's what they were intended to be consumed as. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like these were from summer before last. Usually we were able to go through at least 1 half-gallon jar. But these have just been in the back of the refrigerator for a long time. And, you know, they seemed relevant to the questions because it's talking about like overly ripe sauerkraut and, you know, is it safe and is it what to do with it. So I just thought it would be good to bring in like, you know, an older or wiser ferment and yeah, just to, you know, get the conversation going about what we can do with, you know, the especially funky long running ferments.
Yeah. They're so good too.
So it reminds me of being in like New York City right now.
Yeah,
like
they're delicious.
Yeah,
they're not crunchy anymore, but the flavor is really good. Also, the half sour, the fermentation process makes just the best pickle brine. If you are a pickle brine person, that is the best, and it's like really garlicky. Mm-hmm. I'll probably turn it into pickle pops again, but where you just freeze the brine in popsicle molds and just eat it like that. It's so good.
Why am I not doing that?
Yeah, we got really turned on to that by one experience in Thermopolis, Wyoming.
Yeah.
There was a little diner, drive-through type situation. I can't remember the name of the place. But yeah, they had pickle pops on the menu, and they were just using like Vlasic brine, which is delicious. I mean, it was a good pickle pop, but I just had this inkling to order a pickle pop and a chocolate malt at the same time.
That's interesting.
And yeah, it was kind of like a chaser. I don't know what to call it. A shot chaser type situation.
It went really well together, though.
It was so good.
It reminded me of eating French fries with a Wendy's Frosty. It's that, like the salty and the chocolate thing.
That's so. Now I want.
We'll do that next time.
Okay.
Okay, Anna, we have a few more questions for you. So I really wanted to talk about. You write a Substack newsletter called Creative Fuel that I've been subscribing to for at least a few years now. I love it so much. It's one of the newsletters that I get way too many newsletters, but it's one of the few that I actually read. I always read your newsletter. And I love how, well, first of all, could you just describe what the Creative Fuel newsletter is about for listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the tagline that's like written on there on the about page is the intersection of creativity and everyday life, which is really just an excuse for me to write about whatever I want, but usually through a lens of like creativity and art, but sort of with the idea that creativity just shows up in all of our lives, no matter if we self-identify as artists or writers or and so just like getting to explore a little bit of that, which really just means exploring what it means to be human, I think.
I love that. Do you ever bring like prompts from your own newsletter into the kitchen?
Oh, gosh, that's a really good question. And now I'm like, let's write a whole newsletter about that. No, I haven't actually. But I will say that one thing that I think about a lot, which is in the kitchen is the same, is I've always loved making, like I don't eat meat, so I'm pescatarian. But I've always enjoyed making like plant-based recipes or like gluten-free recipes, just trying to figure out how to do something like within really strict constraints. And I think that that's the same for the creative process, is that, you know, constraints really do breed creativity. And I kind of love being in the kitchen in that way. Like I live in a small town, and so it's a little bit more rural. So it's not like I can just like go to the specialty grocery store to get, you know, the fancy ingredients. Like you kind of just got to make do with what you have. And so that's kind of my style of cooking. And I think that's kind of my style of like creativity as well, is like, yeah, not starting with a totally blank slate, but like actually putting some constraints in place. So that's maybe where, maybe I haven't been intentionally bringing in a prompt, but that's probably where there's a bit of similarity in like my art practice and my like cooking practice.
And how do you create those constraints with your art?
Yeah, well, I think so. I work in paper cut illustration, so for my visual practice. So for anyone who doesn't know, I'm literally cutting a piece of paper with a blade. Like that's what it is. And I think that is like for me, that's really the ultimate constraint, right? Because you don't have color, you don't have shading, you don't have like, you know, you're not building a piece up. You're sort of like removing things. And if you remove too much, well, then you can't put it back. So for me, there's just that medium in particular is a medium of constraints, and I really like it. And I think I like to have that adjacent to my writing practice, because I think writing is it's generative, right? You can always like, you can write a sentence and then you can add to it, and then you can like remove words from it. And you could like work on a sentence for 6 months, right? If you really wanted to. And I think paper cutting is just so different, because you cut pieces of paper and you remove them, and like eventually you get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm done. Like I can't do anything else. And so I like having those two things, because they feel very, they feel very opposite, but also they sort of like support each other for me.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that idea of creation by omission. Like it just sounds cool. I don't know. That's very, very little content to that comment. Sorry.
No, I love it. No, that's honestly like in my work as an editor, I'm always thinking about how much can I take out of this and still get the point across that needs to be made. Because, and then there's a point where you're like, oh, no, oops, I have to undo that. That was too much. But it's kind of interesting to play with, how little you can say and still say what you want to say.
Yeah. And I think like it is interesting to think about that, just living in the culture that we live in, which is, I think, very much a culture of like abundance and a lot, and bigger is better and more is more, you know? So it's interesting to think about how you kind of use that, removing things to find the simplest way to say something, or the simplest way to express something through food. I mean, I think about that a lot just in thinking of like cooking seasonally. You know, I think summer is such a good example of that. Like you don't have to do much to really good summer ingredients, right?
Yeah.
You could slice up a tomato and put it on a plate and call it a day. It's like really like the most simplest, truest expression of that item or that ingredient. And I think often we have a tendency to overcomplicate, because we've I definitely feel that in my art practice too. Like there's this idea that if it's complicated, then it's good because it took more time, which is just influenced by a capitalist mindset of more time in equals more value. But I think the same for food sometimes too. Like I think my favorite meals are usually ones that are like fairly simple to put together and just really enjoyed with other people. And that doesn't need to be, I mean, I love making a complicated recipe for sure, but I think that doesn't mean that that's, the best expression of that. I think there's definitely space for figuring out that sort of that editorial process, like with what you're making, right? Like what's the simplest way that you can make something and have it be really wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that tension is certainly present in recipe writing. Even if you're writing up what is essentially a very simple recipe, you can go into too much detail to the point where it actually starts alienating readers.
Yeah, and that's something we think about all the time. Well, we think about recipe editing all the time because we're trying to fit so much into a finite amount of space in a printed book. And so we're always like, okay, well, how much information is necessary? How much maybe extra is confusing at this point, you know? And you're never going to be able to please everyone perfectly all the time. But that's okay too.
Yeah, and I think that element of also confusing, but it's also like with too much information, you've also sort of removed some of the potential for somebody's own creative process within that, right? I mean, I was thinking about this, just thinking about coming into this conversation, and I was thinking about some of my just like favorite cookbooks or resources, and most of them are not illustrated with photos. Like they are illustrated with illustrations, or they're just text. And I think we've gotten really used also in the food space of just gorgeous, stunning photos of beautiful food, right?
Yeah.
But that can also be really intimidating when you think like, oh gosh, mine didn't turn out that way. Or and I was thinking one of my recipes that I go to a lot in the joy of cooking is the rough puff pastry, because it just works really well for a lot of things, and I use it a lot. And I'm pretty sure if it's not with that recipe, it's with one of the puff pastry recipes. There's just like a simple drawing of like how to do the sort of like folding of the pastry, but it's like, so you see the method, but you don't see the end result. And I think there is this element, we're so used to seeing the end result of something, so we sort of don't engage in the process in the same way. And I think when you don't kind of have all of the overly detailed instructions, there's just more space for you to kind of like lean into it and need to trust yourself a little bit. And I think that's where like the good stuff happens usually. Or that's where you make a change, and then that's your adaptation, and that's the thing that works for you.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, I think there's a temptation to constantly be turning our brains off, and that sometimes I'll get, John just looked at me with this weird face. I'll get to my point. But one of my favorite things about cooking is that it's a process that calls you to be really present with what you're doing. Like it calls you to notice what you're doing, to see if something is turning a different color, or if something smells a certain way, or if it's sizzling in a certain way. And I think our culture largely is constantly telling us to just turn our brains off, like just watch the TikTok video, watch TV, distract yourself constantly. And I love cooking because it's such a tactile process, and it's best when you really pay attention to what you're doing. And I do think that sometimes photos can get in the way of just allowing yourself to experience something for the first time and being okay with the outcome, and then thinking about like, what did I learn from that experience? And you're already judging your own effort by the time you get into the kitchen, sometimes with photos. But yeah, I totally agree. I love illustrated cookbooks. Obviously, we're a little bit biased in that direction.
Yeah. I was thinking too, like, especially from leading a lot of like, workshops centered around like art and creativity. I mean, I think for a lot of people, cooking is a real expression of their creativity. Like that's just like a place that feels like you're kind of in the flow of creative process. You're really, it's a sensory experience, and you're really engaged. And often, to your point, like you haven't turned your brain off. You're not distracted by something else because you're kind of focused on what you're doing. Otherwise, you'll burn yourself, or you'll like add too much of something and make the end result not taste very good. But I think that food is really creative for people, and it is a place where we, especially in a day and age where we don't use our hands very much. A lot of us, to John's point about the numerous tabs and applications, I feel that I'm the same. But it's like I think a lot of us spend a lot of time in digital spaces, and to just be in a physical space where you're using your hands to do something is kind of something we've been doing like all humans across time, and we've lost a little bit of that. And I think that's what's so powerful about food is we do need to eat every day, so it's kind of a chance to like re-engage with that creative process that's really inherent to all of us.
I love that so much.
Kind of wondering if you had any favorite Scandinavian foods that you cook this time of year.
Oh, Yes. I feel like this time of year is just the time. I mean, I grew up so my mom is from Sweden. My dad is from the US, but they moved here in the 70s. And I think when I was born, it was just really important for my mom to do all of the Swedish traditional foods around holidays because, that I think for anyone, that's just like a real time that you sort of like hold on to your culture. And so I just grew up with all Swedish foods and Scandinavian foods, like sort of end of the year. So the sort of classic ones are like for St. Lucia Day, which is December 13th, you have the saffron buns. So they're like these yeasted, it's a yeasted dough with then a saffron in it. So it makes it this like beautiful yellow color. And they're traditionally done in these like backwards S's. And then there's pepparkakor, which is like the Swedish gingersnap. That is very, very popular around this time of year. And then obviously glögg, which is Swedish mulled wine. There's actually a recipe in Joy of Cooking. It was funny. I was looking at this today because I thought to myself, oh, I actually remember writing down a note in there. And it was when the book had first come out, and my dad has like his tried and true glögg recipe that he has been making since he studied in Sweden in the late 60s, early 70s. And he just doesn't budge from it. Like we have lots of discussions about whose glögg recipe is better. But so we had tried the Joy of Cooking one, and that one involves, from memory, it involves pouring alcohol like over sugar in a strainer and then lighting it on fire to like burn it off a little bit. Which I know sounds wild. This is like, I don't do that, but I remember my dad, and I wrote it down. He was like, well, that seems to defeat the purpose, because he wants his really boozy. and so I have that written in pencil in the book. Which is fun.
I will say from experience with that recipe that even burning it does really not take all the alcohol out of it.
No. Yeah, the way that I make mine, which is a method that I read about from Marcus Samuelsson, the Swedish chef who has restaurants in New York, is to do kind of an infusion. So basically to put all of the spices in a jar, and some I usually put some orange peel and as well, and just like pour the alcohol into that, and also some dried fruit. And I just let that sit overnight, and then I strain that off. And so it kind of makes for this like spicy, sweetened alcohol that then I mix in with the rest of it.
That sounds delicious.
Yeah.
We'll have to try that. Research.
Research.
I wanted to ask you, so Anna, you are a cyclist, right?
Yeah.
What do you like to pack on a long ride to eat?
It's a good question. Well, first of all, I'm a big believer in N+1. So often in the bike community, N+1 is like the number of bikes that you have, which is however many bikes plus another one. But I like to use that as like how many baked goods you get to have on a ride. And N is the number of people you're on the ride with, +1. So you always get an extra baked good if you stop at a bakery. And I always joke that I just want to do a ride that's long enough to, feel good going to the bakery or like a brewery. That's my kind of my ideal ride. But I think for riding, I have a tendency now to want more savory than I want sweet. So even sometimes, like I used to make a lot of, more things with like peanut butter and honey or kind of more granola bars. And I just find now that I just really want savory stuff. So there was a ride I went on like a year ago where I'd made some like kind of rice ball type things, which is not something that I ended up figuring. I should have done a little bit more recipe testing on that. But I think those types of things that taste more savory and are just like small and easy to eat is kind of what I go to. I've also been just mostly on short rides lately. So I just we have a standing Sunday morning ride, and that just involves coffee and something and a treat with it afterwards. So
I just wanted to, I saw like on your social media that you are currently writing a book about cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious what led you to that topic. It seems like, especially considering that it sounds like you're approaching it from multiple angles, and it just sounded really daunting. And I was just wondering, what inspired you to write about cold?
Yeah. It is daunting. So I, because I live in the Puget Sound, I live near saltwater. And so I've been going in the water, swimming. I wouldn't call it swimming in the winter. It's more just like dipping, but all year round for a few years. And so that just kind of tapped me into like a cold water swimming and plunging community, and just have been watching the sort of like rise in popularity of that for the last few years. And then I just got really fascinated by sort of like, what that kind of draw is, what cold does for us mentally, physically, and kind of what a larger cultural perspective on that is, and kind of what that all means in the face of climate change. So that's what I'm currently working on. It's due next October, so I got time. But it's
it really creeps up on you.
Really creeps up, but you guys know.
Yeah,
yeah. But actually, I haven't started reading it yet. But I did just get Nicola Twiley, I think is her last name, book Frostbite, which is all about the history of refrigeration and food. So there's sort of these like interesting. It's really easy to think like, oh, this is just about cold water, but there's just so many interesting ways I think that cold shows up in how just our everyday lives that maybe we don't think about. So yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering if you were planning on dealing with, food ways, food traditions that are kind of related to that subject.
Yeah, well, there's definitely certain food traditions where like hot and cold and combining or avoiding one or the other based upon time of year or based upon how somebody's feeling. It's like very much part of like Ayurvedic medicine comes to mind. Hot and cold plays like a pretty big role in that. And even like just even reading up on like ice cream, right?
Yeah.
And, like, I don't know, just sort of just our like emotional attachment to that or our response to that, like when we eat it, is really interesting to me.
Cool. It sounds like
I'm really excited to read that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I am too, but got to write it first.
Well, good luck on your writing journey. That sounds like a really fun project. Anna, where can our listeners find you online?
Yeah. So the Creative Fuel newsletter is Creative Fuel on Substack. And then I'm on Instagram just with my name, Anna Brones.
And so now we're going to move into the segment where we answer a caller question from last week. This week, we're going to be talking about fermentation, but specifically about sauerkraut. Sarah, can you read the text?
Can you leave kraut out for too long? I made a batch and was sitting on my bookshelf, and then on day 4, I left for a trip, forgetting to put the kraut in the fridge. By the time I returned, it was day 9. The kraut is extra fizzy and a little on the mushy side. Is it okay to eat it?
I love this question so much because back when we don't currently have a website, that is soon to change. But back in the day when we did have a website, the sauerkraut recipe, and we had a few other fermentation recipes, but those recipes in particular got so many comments, and so many of the comments were like, is my sauerkraut safe to eat? Yeah. Is it okay? And of course, when someone's asking you that question online, you're like, I have no idea. You really have to like use your judgment. But I would just say, I think, there haven't been any recorded cases of food poisoning coming from fermented foods.
Oh, wow.
Ever.
I mean, we've sat in on at least 2 fermentation workshops with Sandra Katz, who has made that point at every single one of them.
Yeah.
And I guess, that's straight from a microbiologist at the USDA's Agricultural Research Service, ARS.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's very safe. So probably, I would say the sauerkraut is fine to eat. The question is more like, do you want to eat it? Like, is it delicious?
Texture wise, like, does it make you want to put it on a hot dog? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I feel like it just it's going to get sharper and funkier over time, and that can be great. It's all a matter of personal preference. But yeah, the real thing that I think would turn most people off is texture. Like if it's starting to get slimy, obviously that's not great. And well, at least I would think that it's not great. And also strange colors. I know that we were discussing this question a few days ago, and you were talking about how how fermentation in fall specifically, was a little bit problematic?
Well, so I used to work on a goat dairy, and in the fall, the person I worked for, the cheesemaker I worked for, would tell me that like cheese making in the fall is a little bit more, it can be a little bit more tricky because there are lots more yeasts and bacteria in the air just from like plants decaying, from leaves falling and then decaying. So there's just more microbial activity in the air. So we would run into problems like, when we were aging the cheeses, they would develop a bloom of some kind of mold that we didn't want, or they would turn pink, which is like a yeast. And we were still making cheese the whole time, and most of it was successful, but you would run into more problems in the fall. And so I do feel like even though it's a great time of year for fermenting because everything kind of comes, you're harvesting all the crops in the fall, and it's a really great time to preserve things. It can be a little trickier. I've definitely had issues with sauerkraut specifically, like getting a yeast kind of colony in it, and then it kind of turns a little pink. And it's not the end of the world. It's not dangerous, but it also can just start tasting weird or like bitter. And the texture can sometimes get slimy, which for me is a big no. But I would say like, I don't think 9 days or even twice that amount at room temperature, I think that's totally fine for kraut. In fact, some people are very adamant that you need to ferment it for like 4 weeks or something.
Yeah, much longer than that.
Before you eat it. So I think it's fine. But also I would say, in my experience, I don't like throwing away food. It makes me feel really bad and like I've failed somehow. But also I've saved kraut that wasn't that good. And then what ends up happening is it sits in the back of the fridge for like a year and I never want to eat it. And then I end up throwing it away anyway. So I would just say like, give yourself permission. If it doesn't taste right, if it's not good, just throw it away and try again. Like it'll work out eventually. Don't beat yourself up over it.
Do you have any favorite sauerkraut recipes?
Oh, yeah. We added a recipe for Sauerkraut Fritters to the last edition that are fantastic. Really enjoy those.
Yeah, they're like studded with little chunks of Gruyere or some kind of like Alpine cheese. And then they're not deep fried. It's like a shallow, like just pan fry situation. Those are delicious. And then there's also a sauerkraut soup enjoy that we added that we really love.
And that would be perfect for, quote unquote, overripe sauerkraut, just because you're using it more as it's not like a condiment. It's not a pickle necessarily. You're using it to flavor like a whole pot.
Yeah. No, that's a great use for really ripe sauerkraut. It's got kielbasa in it and paprika and tomatoes and some potato. So it's like a really hearty, delicious soup that, it kind of doesn't matter if your kraut is really, really ripe.
Yeah, and you can use it. You could use like overly ripe sauerkraut for like in a braised sauerkraut situation as well. If it's really like too much for you, or you think it's going to be too much in a braised dish, you can always just add some fresh cabbage to it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that idea of diluting it a little bit to just get the flavor, but you still have some of the fresher cabbage for crunch.
Yeah, the texture, it helps texture-wise, yeah.
Anna, do you have any sauerkraut tales to tell or things that you like to do with sauerkraut?
Yeah, well, I was actually, when you were saying permission to throw out something, for a while I was into making pickled ginger, just like with a fermented. I think that was a recipe probably from Kirsten Shockey that I was following, and it was actually like really good. And then one time I made one and it was just weird.
Yeah.
And I think it's same thing. It just sat in my fridge for a long time because I felt bad.
Yeah.
And then eventually I threw it out. But I feel like we always have a jar of something fermented in the fridge. I feel like we definitely usually have some kimchi on hand to add to all kinds of things. And I haven't made any recently, but certainly I think I sort of feel the same about creativity too. I just have like different seasons of the things that you kind of ebb and flow in and out of. And I just have had times where I do like way more fermented stuff in the kitchen and then not. But when I have a friend who just usually does just a small jar of like a really simple, straightforward cabbage and carrots just on the counter for a few days. And I kind of like doing those more. Again, I'm just like, I want the constraints and I want the simplicity. So anything that doesn't involve too much process is great for me.
If you have a topic, ingredient, or joy story to share, call our hotline at 503-395-8858. Leave us a message or send us a text. We would love to hear from you. And next week's topic comes from our caller.
I have 2 celeriac bulbs, but do not like the taste of celery. Should I hand them off to a more grateful person, or is there a magic recipe that turns them tasty?
I love that question so much.
too.
All right. What are you guys thinking about for this next week food wise? What are we doing? I know we all have a CSA box coming this week. I was reading the list of what's supposed to be in it, which is very exciting because I feel like it's a really good box.
Oh yeah, celery roots in there.
John really loves. I like celery root too, but John really likes it.
Yeah, when it's roasted with schmaltz. Yes.
Yeah, specifically.
Everything's delicious when it's roasted with schmaltz. Well, we have a canning club meeting this week.
Oh, yeah,
as well.
that's right.
So I'm gonna spend, I think, this afternoon canning. I think I'm gonna do a Marissa McClellan's cranberry orange compote. She does food in jars, which is I love that
It's so
website
good.
and that book. Everything she does, talking about simplicity. I think that's one of her biggest things is like her canning recipes are so simple, very easy to do, but also just always tasty. So
We need to have her on the podcast.
oh my gosh, she's the best.
She's the best.
She is. But yeah, I'm excited for Canning Club, and I'll have to come up with. I'm hosting this week, so some cute appetizer situation.
Yeah, I think we're probably, I don't know, we don't have any plans to can anything, but I did make a big batch of fire cider about a
yeah.
month ago. So it's about ready to strain and decant. So I will probably bring that. It's fire cider season.
Can you explain fire cider really quickly for people who might not know?
Fire cider, I'm hoping I get this right. I believe it was invented by someone named Rosemary Gladstar, who's an herbalist, and it is just it's like an infusion of many medicinal but also delicious things. So it's kind of it's interesting because it's sweetened usually like with a little honey or some maple syrup or something, but it also has savory ingredients in it like onion and garlic, ginger, sometimes spices. I added dried elderberries to mine because I wanted to make it more like Pacific Northwest, and elderberries are so good, and they make it this beautiful like fuchsia color.
You skipped the onions though, right?
No, I did add some. I added some onions,
okay.
but I think so. I have an aversion to raw onions. I really super hate them, actually. And but I think it will be okay in the finished fireside. I don't think it's going to taste like straight up onion.
You have enough other things.
Just a suspicion of onion. Yeah.
I think we're going to be doing a big batch of chili later today and some green chili cornbread for some
For dinner,
for dinner. But
which is very exciting.
yes,
You brought that green chili cornbread over to my house recently. And it was delicious.
I'm trying to become known as the person who brings cornbread to everything.
Oh, I like it. I like that goal. Anna, what about you? Anything you're excited to cook this week?
Yeah, well, since Thanksgiving is down the line, we don't usually do traditional Thanksgiving foods in our house. We just use it as my husband and I use it as an opportunity to go through all of our cookbooks and just find things that sound fun to make. So we've got just some time to sit down this week and look through some cookbooks to find some fun things. I was thinking of doing some kind of like a chowder recipe because that just sounded fun. I don't know why. And then also last week, we tested out a recipe that's from Hattie McKinnon. That's like a one sheet. It's like a ramen noodle tofu bok choy situation that was really good. So I'm just excited about doing that again. Because I like I have a lot of recipes that I just repeat a lot. Maybe like slightly more boring in the kitchen than maybe people would assume. But I just like those like really straightforward go-to things that, are good for a couple of meals.
I'm writing that recipe down.
I know.
I want to try that.
I'm writing it down too.
yeah, I feel like we have a few Hattie McKinnon recipes that have been on repeat.
Yeah, like the dumpling salad. That's delicious.
That was definitely a go-to this summer, for sure.
Thanks for listening to the Joy of Cooking podcast. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcast and iTunes. Follow us on Instagram at The Joy of Cooking. Stay tuned for next week where we will tackle celeriac root, and call in with questions, hopes, history, or where you find joy in the kitchen. 503-395-8858. Again, that's 503-395-8858.
We could not do this without our fantastic team at the Joy of Creation production house. Thank you to Kayleen Veach, our production coordinator, Haley Bowers, our audio engineer, and Sarah Marshall, our producer.